Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And then could we just start? I think we are ready. It's 3:03. Could you, Andi, kind of do a quick intro, and then we can go in, and then I will talk a little bit about, you know, what COVID loan tracker is, and then we can get into the Q&A section.
Yeah, so hi everybody, my name is Andi Smiles. I'm a small business financial consultant and the owner of andysmiles.com. So just a quick hit on my background. I've been in the finance world for about 11 years. I started my business as a bookkeeper, and then as my bookkeeping practice grew and hit its capacity, I moved more into the consulting realm, and then also from there, as my consulting practice grew and hit its capacity, I moved more into financial literacy. So I do a lot of teaching. You may have seen my name if you read Gusto articles, especially on PPP, because I've done several articles on Gusto on IDLE and PPP loans. I think that's how Rita found me and got in touch with me. And then I write on other publications. I have a blog and a podcast. I don't really talk specifically about like PPP and IDLE stuff there. It's more around general business finance education. So if you're looking for that, that's a good place to go. But you know, today we're really kind of focusing in more on the government relief loans.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Andi. I am Rita, and I'm one of the co-founders of COVID Loan Tracker. And, you know, we invited Andi because we wanted to have a very sort of small business finances focused Q&A where she can share best practices, any tips, any tricks, and also provide very useful, proven free templates and resources that can help anybody with their financial wellness. And so let's get into the questions. We wrote down all the questions and we will be going through them. Please feel free to ask any as we go along. Okay, so let's see. So we will start a little bit about, let's start with the tracking IDLE and PPP spending. Most small businesses probably either got a PPP loan or an IDLE loan or an IDLE advance. So the couple questions that we had is we had a business, a nonprofit, asking, can you please offer advice for nonprofit PPP tracking and forgiveness application? How do we report PPP on financial statements?
Okay. Yeah, so sorry, my dog is howling in the background, so I apologize. So in terms of reporting PPP on financial statements, the way that PPP originally comes into your account, so when you get your PPP loan, you get a deposit, right? Maybe one, maybe two, depending on the number of disbursements. That deposit actually gets coded as a liability until you receive your forgiveness, because that's what a PPP loan is until you are granted forgiveness. It isn't a liability, and then you will apply for forgiveness. Now, if you receive full forgiveness or partial forgiveness, the process is the same. So basically, if you take that money, I got $20,000, that becomes a liability in Quickbooks. Then once you apply for your PPP forgiveness and you receive your determination, which is either, yay, you got it all forgiven, you got X percentage forgiven, you are going to then code that forgiveness against the liability as non-income. I would even create a category called other income in Quickbooks is the actual type of category, and I would call it something like non-income -PPP forgiveness. And that's how you would code that. So if you received $20,000 forgiveness on your $20,000 loan, then obviously the liability cancels out, and you know that ends up on the bottom of your profit and loss statement. as non-income, PPP forgiveness. If you receive $15,000 of forgiveness on your $20,000 loan, then you have an open liability of $5,000. And that is the truth of what's happening, right? In the literal sense of what's happening with your forgiveness, you now have $5,000 of that loan you need to pay back. So that's how you track these things on like the technical level in QuickBooks. In terms of, and really any accounting program, because this is just general like accounting principles around how the PPP money is coded. So the main takeaway here, it's a liability until you receive your forgiveness. That's the thing to keep in mind. So the date of your forgiveness is the date that you're gonna put into the account to code it against non-income, because it's not income, right? It's like kind of like a government grant. Okay, so how do you track your spending? So how do you actually track the things that you are spending your money on? So best practices is definitely to have a separate checking account for the funds, whether they be PPP or IDLE funds. That's just gonna make your life so much easier, and to pay for the expenses that are qualified under these loans out of those accounts. Like that is, if you wanna do this the way that's gonna make your life the easiest, the cleanest, very easy to go back into your records. That is the way to do
time,
it.
Saves efforts, yeah.
Yes. There's another feature in QuickBooks that you can use that would also help you, which is the class tracking feature. Now, class tracking basically is a feature in QuickBooks that allows you to essentially add an additional tag to any income or expense. So you may have payroll, right? That is the tax deduction category, the expense category, however you want to think about that. The class tag, the class tracking allows you to say, this payroll is coming from PPP funding. So you can kind of add like it's like a tagging system. It's the best way to describe it. That is really useful if you are not like somebody that's a sole proprietor that's just basically like taking this out as a draw, right? Because for some folks who are self-employed and sole proprietors, the PPP stuff is pretty straightforward. For other folks, if you have many employees and you're using it for utilities and you're using it for rent, and you really need to keep track of like where you are with your thresholds of 60 versus 40, right? When you're really having, if you have big loan amounts and a lot of expenses that are going to be covered by these loans, class tracking would be really, really helpful, because you can run profit and loss reports via class. So you can actually run a report with a complete breakdown of everything that you spent your PPP money on or IDLE money on, right? You can run profit and loss reports. You can do things where you can settings where you can do percentages of each expense category of total spending. So that's where we start to see, am I on track to spend the right threshold for PPP? Yeah, so class tracking is definitely, if you have more complicated expenses and you're gonna be, dealing with this for a while, and your PPP funds are really gonna be allocated to a lot of places, that is another option. It is an upgrade. So you have to upgrade your QuickBooks Online account. If you're going to do that, to QuickBooks Online Plus. I can give you a link where you can get 50% off the first 12 months of QuickBooks Online. If you're already using QuickBooks, I guess you can't use that. So it's only for new users, but
yeah. So the other question that people kind of ask about this PPP is calculating. I'm confused on full-time employees and how to know when to apply.
Yeah, so, we'll get there. I just want to finish on the tracking piece, because there's a lot more to say about that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so we can get there, but that is like a different thing.
Okay.
So that's something else. So can I just finish this piece?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool. So the other thing you want to keep in mind when you're doing your PPP tracking, especially in a system like QuickBooks, is if you're going to need to do incurred payroll versus just regular payroll, right? Because under the new guidance that we received, the Flexibility Act, you now have the ability to also count incurred payroll. So if your forgiveness window ends before you actually can run your payroll cycle, that incurred payroll counts. So in QuickBooks, what you would do is you would, if you're in that situation, you want to use the bills feature, which again, you're going to have to upgrade to Plus. I'm sorry, but this is the truth of it. All these features are upgraded features, but you could use the bills features to essentially enter in your incurred payroll and then tag them as PPP expenses. And again, we're just talking about like, how do we keep things easy, right? How do we keep things so organized? How do we not have to go back, 20 weeks from now and try to like sort through a lot of transactions? Is
there any way to do this on a DIY way? Would you say like on a, because a lot of people, maybe can't do upgrades or something, and so what is the best way to do this on like a Excel sheet, for example, or do you recommend it, or should it,
I mean, I definitely recommend if you are going to, if you're not using QuickBooks, or you're like, oh, I can't do any of the stuff that she just said, then you can use a spreadsheet. Honestly, I did like a quick Google search, and people, like, there are PPP loan expensing tracking sheets that people have made, so you can absolutely like get a free one online. You can also, I have 2 links in here of articles I've written for Gusto. Both of them have 2 different spreadsheets in them to help you. So one of them is like an allocation spreadsheet, and that can kind of just help you project how to allocate your PPP loan, and the article that accompanies it has like an entire like process to help you through that. The other one is to help you with your actual loan application and to do some of the calculations, because there's a lot of math in the application if you're not doing the easy. So, like, I would also start with those 2 because we're giving you the links. And if those are not going to work for you, you can Google PPP expense tracking spreadsheet, and I'm sure there'll be plenty of things to come up to support you.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So the first one I sent is completing application, and then this second one is spending and allocation. Spending and okay. Spending. All right, here we go. Another. Okay. Next. So next question, still under sort of PPP related. It's a company is an LLC and asking about PPP forgiveness. It says, I'm confused on the FTEs and how to know when to apply. Is the calculation over the entire 20-week period or just the 8-week prior to application? And then, yeah.
Well, it's comparative, right? So when you apply, you're comparing so basically like the reduction is compared to the, to what you put on your application, right? So whatever you put on your application, that is then with your reports and stuff, that's then what they're comparing the reduction to. So your reduction, so I also put an article in here because there's a great article. I didn't write it on Gusto, but it's actually an entire article about the strategy of when to apply for your forgiveness. Because based on different factors, when you should apply for forgiveness changes. But the general rule of thumb with the FTEs, like when should I apply, you should be applying for forgiveness whenever your FTEs are, and salary and wages that you're paying folks are the highest, right? Because then you're going to have the least reduction. So if you've used up all your PPP money and you're like, cool, I have all my FTEs are like really high, my salary is really high, and I'm going to be able to maintain this for another month or 2, that's probably a good time to apply for forgiveness, right? Because then you're showing that you were able to maintain. Now, there are other things to think about here, because maybe your salary and your FTEs aren't high, but you know that you're going to be able to meet some of the safe harbors a little bit later on, right? Because there are all sorts of different safe harbors around the FTEs and the salary. then maybe you want to wait to apply for forgiveness. So with a question like this, there's no clear, like, you should apply when X happens, or you should apply, like, you should apply as soon as you're done, or you should wait, because it's sort of strategy based on what's going on in your business and what you're going to be able to maintain. What I will say, you have up to 24 weeks to spend the money. So if you spend it in less time, you are allowed to apply for forgiveness, right? And some people want to apply for forgiveness early, right? Some people are like, I just want to apply for forgiveness and have this whole thing be done with, because I want to be sure and feel that surety that I'm going to get forgiveness. Yeah. Other people may need to wait until the end of the year so they can meet the safe harbors. So it really just depends on, you know, if you've had FTE reductions, if you have salary reductions, if you're going to be able to meet the safe harbors, you know, the timing is going to depend more on like your unique circumstance.
All right. And then also there is the factor of the second stimulus coming out, correct? Because that kind of can affect whether people should, you know, maybe wait, because who knows, because there are, you know, some people or there's some speculation that there might be some forgiveness, or, you know, maybe automatic forgiveness to some small businesses, or just new rules about the whole forgiveness application, and yeah.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too, you know, we went through the PPP Flexibility Act, and then the PPP Easy application came out, and my first thought was like, man, for all the people who applied with that original application that didn't need to, that sucks, because that application is pretty tough to fill out, you know, there's a lot in there. So, you know, you need to, you really need to make the decision based on you, right? Again, some people want to wait to see if there's new guidance, and some people want to just get it over with. It's so individual. We can't tell you this is the right time for every single business owner.
Okay. So we are done with that question, would you say, Andi?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay. Moving on to the next question. So PPP related. Can you add 1099 employee who continued to work at a company and did not apply for the PPP loan? No. So I'm assuming this is sort of a person who maybe, No. Okay.
No. So the SBA's like fact sheet from way back when they were doing those weekly FAQ fact sheets specifically says, no, that person as a 1099 contractor can apply for their own PPP loan because they're self-employed, right? Mm-hmm. But you can't call them an employee. Like, you can't just be like, well, they act like an employee, so I should count them towards payroll. That would actually probably get you in trouble with worker classification laws. If you're going to use that type of argument, you would then, the IRS would be like, well, great, they should have been an employee a year ago, and now you owe us back payroll taxes. So,
okay,
no. If they weren't an employee,
hard no.
Yeah, it's a hard no. I mean, the SBA FAQ is like, nope. So it's a no.
Okay. Well, that's good to know. Okay. Now I think we are moving kind of like onto PPP and IDLE. So IDLE, it notes that it may not be used for same expenses as PPP loan. Please clarify. I received PPP loan in May, spent within original 8-week time frame, including payroll between loan receipt in May and original expiration in July. Am I able to use the other loans, IDLE, for payroll for August going forward? Not the same time period under which PPP loan was used.
Yes, you can use your IDLE money for the same types of expenses, right? Because IDLE is meant to be used for working capital, which is pretty broad, right? Working capital, some of that is paying your employees. It just can't be used for the exact same expense. So if you're trying to double count an expense for each loan, so let's say you run payroll on June 1st and you try to like say, I used my PPP loan and my IDLE loan both for that June 1st payroll, you're not allowed to do that, right? So you can't basically like double up in order to kind of like use up both funds. on the same expenses. But if they are in different time periods, then that's fine.
Okay, so if it's consequential or subsequential, or yeah, if
It
it
doesn't
comes
even
after each
matter.
other, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you basically just can't claim an expense as a PPP expense and then claim that same expense. And we're not talking about type, we're not talking about expense categories. We're talking about like the actual physical money going out of your account for that expense on that date as an idle expense as well.
Okay.
So payroll's an expense category. We're talking about the actual payroll run that you did being counted twice. That's okay.
Amber asked us a question, and I just wanted to ask it now because it's relevant to the FTE. Are the FTEs an average over the entire period, or just the number you have when you apply for forgiveness?
Well, there are safe harbors. So this is not, again, I mean, this is the problem with all of these, and I apologize in advance that no answer to a question is going to be very straightforward because there's so many things, but it's generally an average.
Okay. All right. So next, in order to qualify for IDLE, does the company require exhausting all other possible lending alternatives?
No, under CARES, you don't have to prove you can't get funding elsewhere. So that's how SBA loans typically work before, the pandemic. So a lot of people still have that in mind, but that actually was like one of the benefits of these coronavirus relief loans was that you no longer have to prove that you can't get funding elsewhere. That requirement's waived.
Okay, great. Next question, can I use my IDLE to pay IRS? Can I use my IDLE loan to pay my 2019 income taxes and 2020 estimates? I am a sole proprietor with 2 employees.
Okay, this one is very unclear, and I'll explain why. Because I went down a deep rabbit hole because I remember hearing one thing and I wanted to double check it. So I wanted to go and find the evidence of the thing I'd read before. And then it was like a whole rabbit hole. So basically there are 2 camps on this, and one camp says yes and one camp says no.
Wow.
Yeah, so this is a really challenging question to answer because there actually, and I have seen screenshots of this, was an SBA slide share or PowerPoint presentation that specifically said IDLE cannot be used to refinance debt or repay federal debt, but there's an exception for tax debt. Then people started calling SBA and asking them this question, and some SBA agents said it's fine, and some SBA agents said it's not fine. So there is no straight answer. So I can't give you a straight answer because I don't have a clear answer either. And I did quite a bit of research on this because I found articles that people were like, yes. I found articles where people were like, no. So unfortunately,
we need to basically have to go to the SBA and maybe not even like a representative, but more like a supervisor or some kind of, I don't know, higher person who can really respond to this question, correct?
That's what I would do. I've listed 2 videos that you can put in the chat. So the first video, because these are people talking about this really in depth. The first video is somebody who's leaning in the yes camp. And he's really talking about it from the idea of what is working capital and the definition of working capital from the SBA, and how the definition of working capital is anything to keep your business operational. So therefore isn't paying our taxes, whatever. So you'll see in the video how he frames it.
I'm going to put it as interpretation because I guess if there is not a way.
Yeah, you have to watch them and decide how you want to interpret the laws, right? Because there's clearly no, that we don't really know. Video number 2, which quite honestly, if I had an IDLE loan, is the methodology I would follow because I'm very conservative in the way that I follow rules around this stuff, is a no with a workaround. So it's a no with a, but you could do this and then do this. So, and those workarounds are within what's legally stated about IDLE. So
The good news is, here's some good news. So on our last PPP Forgiveness webinar, which was 2 days ago, we actually had some three SBA people on the webinar, and I reached out to them. So I'm hoping that I could, and this is so great that this came up, this question, I'm talking to them next week, and I want to confirm some of these super ambiguous questions so that we can get an official yes or no on these. So I think that might be a really good thing to.
And I would add, when you have that talk with them, because this is part of the confusion around it, is pay the IRS, pay my taxes. What taxes? Payroll taxes? Well, probably. What entities taxes, right? So if you're a C Corp and you have business taxes, that is probably going to be more on the yes side of things, where if you are like a pass-through entity, well, a sole proprietorship or single member LLC without an S election, then you the owner is taxed, right? So an S Corp, you know, you're taxed on your income tax. So which taxes are we talking about for which entities? Because that's a really important clarification here. When we say taxes, we have all sorts of taxes that people are paying on all sorts of different things. So we need to know what specific taxes can you pay and for what entities. Can a sole proprietorship use their EIDL to pay their self-employment tax, for example?
Okay, thank you for that. Just one more question from Natalie. Can you use EIDL to pay state unemployment fees for Q2 of 2020?
On your payroll, like your payroll taxes, like, because that's part of payroll tax. Like usually the state taxes that you pay are like the unemployment taxes. Those are part of employer payroll taxes. Okay. And that, in my opinion, that should be under working capital.
Okay.
Right, because that's a requirement that you have to do that if you have employees. Like, to me, that's just an operational expense. Okay. Where we're getting into the weeds is the pass-through entity situation. Yeah. Of if the owner is taxed on their business profits, how does that relate to EIDL?
Thank you. So next question. When will I be able to access the new EIDL terms and conditions related to Medicaid providers that includes the use of the loan for lost revenue? I watched the video and meet the 6 criteria to qualify and have received the loan. However, all the documents I can find are the original terms and conditions related to the initial disbursements for Medicare providers.
I don't know the answer to this question. This would be a good question to ask the SBA people. So one thing just to keep in mind, the really tough thing about these loans, and this was happening a lot in the early PPP days when nobody knew anything, is everyone just waits around on the SBA, and the SBA is probably waiting around on itself. So, you know, it's really hard. There's a lot of stuff that we just don't know. And oftentimes we're either waiting for the SBA to release the information, and they're probably waiting to release their process on it, right? Because information, then you have to have a whole process to back it up. Yeah. Or they've released it somewhere and it's so buried. I don't know if you've tried to find information on the SBA website, but it is not easy. I tried to look this one up.
So difficult. Oh my God.
Yeah. So some of these, you just have to ask them. Okay. And they will probably tell you they don't know too if you have like an initial agent. So I think you, like Rita, being able to like talk directly with 3 people is great to get like really clear answers on these.
Okay, I will note that. Natalie said that she was asking from a nonprofit's perspective, the whole state unemployment fees.
It shouldn't matter. I mean, nonprofit or not, this is a payroll cost.
Okay.
Like it's a payroll cost, like nonprofit. You know, okay. Like.
Okay, so I am asking as a sole proprietor, employee tax retention credit, how to account for in books?
Okay, so according to the IRS, the amount of this credit should be recorded against your payroll against the deduction of payroll taxes, right? Because you basically pay them and then you get like a reduction on what you're paying, right? It's like debit credit, and then it balances out to what you've truly paid. So it's pretty easy. I included an article from Wave just in case. Sometimes some of this stuff you need to see it, which is why I've included like a lot of articles so you can read it if that's how you learn. So they talk about it, but basically you just categorize it against your payroll liabilities. So if you have
let me add this article in real quick.
If you have like payroll taxes as a line item, you know, you would say payroll taxes, and then the credit would be coded against the payroll taxes. So what you would have originally owed, and then that credit against that. The only things I want you to keep in mind about like how to account for it in the books is like if you're using QuickBooks Online, for example, and you're running your payroll through Intuit Payroll, the system itself has its own way of taking care of that. So, so you need to make sure that however you're running your payroll, if it's like within QuickBooks and you're using Intuit Payroll, that you're not trying to double do something that the system's accounting for. So in that case, you want to make sure that you look into these things with your payroll provider if you're doing that within a payroll provider that's in an accounting software. Same is true for like Gusto. Like if you're using like a QuickBooks Gusto integration, you just want to double check that integration to make sure that that's not already being accounted for somehow, because we just don't want to be like doubling up on things that these integrations or the softwares are automatically doing.
Just a question, is QuickBooks free to what is the cost of like a QuickBooks? Just so people, I don't know.
For QuickBooks Online is like the accounting software or the payroll software? Because it's like an add-on to the base fee of QuickBooks Online, like accounting software. So you basically have like accounting, you have it as like a bookkeeping system, but then you can add in payroll functionality.
Oh, okay. Thank you for explaining that, because I had no idea. I don't use QuickBooks. Okay. So again, from an LLC, I'm asking as an LLC, how best to project financials for a new business? We are a two-owner LLC.
Okay, so you're going to hear for a lot of these next questions on projections. I'm going to be recommending a webinar that I'm doing with Gusto on September 1st. Rita, I don't know if they updated you on that date. I think they did.
I actually followed up with today.
Okay, cool. So we're doing, and I've included links to 2 articles. So basically myself, Gusto, and another accounting software that does forecasting put together an amazing template on cash flow forecasting. We have a 2-article series. The 3rd is coming out next week. The template is free. It's an amazing spreadsheet. I played around with it for case studies. It's really, really cool. I'm going to field a lot of these to the webinar simply because we're going to spend an entire hour going over how to do these things that you're asking about. And to me, it's more beneficial for you to spend an hour really like learning than me trying to answer this in like 3 minutes, because it's a disservice to you for me to say, well, how best to project financials for a new business in 3 minutes, opposed to knowing that you're going to have like an hour to see this entire process and get a free tool for it.
Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. And I will make a note of that too. Natalie came back with another question. We previously turned down the EIDL loan and our organization is not bouncing back like we hoped. What are the odds we can go back and accept the funds?
I don't know, because, you know, I don't know what the fund situation is like right now, right? And I don't know how many applications they have that they're still processing, how much is left in their like bank, so to speak. I would just try to talk to the original representative that you spoke to. If you had talked to somebody and then, you know, kind of thought it through and decided against it, but you'd been in communication with somebody, that would be like the best first step, is to reach out to that person because you already have a relationship with them. And if not, maybe call the SBA if you still have like a case number or some sort of number that they gave you with the offer of the loan. Then call them with that number. Basically try to like get your place back in line is what I'm saying. and see if that's possible. But the easiest way to do that is first, whoever, if you had a point of contact, reaching out to that person. If you didn't, like still trying to get like a real person to help you and support you.
Yeah. And actually IDLE reconsideration is one, and that this is, I guess this kind of falls under that umbrella, is one of the most asked questions from us. And so that's another thing I really want to kind of like work with the SBA with and figure out, you know, like a guidance or something for that. So, you know, for whatever reason people, you know, didn't accept or were declined or whatever, how can they basically get back in line? And then there's also sort of the news about how the Democratic Party has this kind of, for the stimulus plan, having another round of EIDL grants and EIDL loans proposed, but again, no, who knows? And that kind of discussions are currently stalling. All right, so should I put these forecasting links there, or we're just gonna do?
Oh, you can put the links in the chat, because if somebody is like, no, I really am excited about this and I want to jump into this now, like the template is live. The webinar is actually me and Blake, who is from the Giraffe, who does specifically like forecasting software, us going through it. So if you're somebody that's like, I can like play with a spreadsheet and go through an article and learn it and I'm all good, like you can do that now, or you can try it. And if you're like, actually, I need to watch folks talk about it, then you can come to the webinar.
Okay, let me insert. Okay, cash flow template, 2 templates.
And these questions are super great. I know I'm not answering them, but I'm actually right after this doing a meeting, a webinar planning meeting with them. So I'm going to bring these questions in to that meeting. So for anyone who asks these questions, they're like, oh, she didn't answer them, I'm actually going to bring them into the webinar planning meeting. So it's still good that you asked them.
Great, greatly appreciated. Okay, so number 10, managing cash flow when revenues remain down over 50, 80, whatever percent.
Yeah, again, this cash flow webinar, you know, we actually, the reason that we even did this article series, and the whole reason of this whole thing that has now become like a webinar and all this other stuff, was because we wanted to give people a tool to answer this exact question. Like this was the original purpose of this webinar series and this template, was to like help people who are like, my revenue's down, what do I do? How do I keep money in the bank? How do I pay people? Do I need to take out a loan? At what point? Like all of those big questions.
Okay.
So again, this template and the webinar will be able to answer that really fully and show you how
to be really important. Yeah, okay. Great. The next question, it's a LLC retail business. We did not expect to pay ourselves our first year. However, should we try to include some owner payout in our payroll for our first year and in our projections? Do you recommend any payroll services?
Okay, so the first thing is, I don't know if this is an LLC filing with an S election, like an S Corp election, or an LLC filing as a single member LLC, or as an LLC filing as a partnership. But what I would tell you is that unless you're an L or C Corp, I mean, you can file with all sorts of tax elections. But what I will say is I'm going to operate that this is a single member LLC without an S Corp election. You're not allowed to pay your members via payroll. So you actually have to pay them via owner draw, which you can certainly like work into your cash flow budget, but you can't just pay yourself through payroll via your single member LLC. If you want to do that, then you do need to file the S election. So you need to basically ask the IRS, instead of taxing you as a sole proprietorship, you ask them to tax you as an S Corp or C Corp. You know, you could do either one. Most people are going to choose S Corp because of cost wise, but again, this is we're talking to an accountant, running the numbers, figuring out which election is best for you. But let's just say S Corp. Then if you are filing as a single member, as an LLC with an S election, so now you're an S Corp, then you can pay yourself as an owner. We call them owner employee. So you're basically an owner of the company and you're also an employee of the company. Yeah. Then you will pay yourself payroll, like employee wages. So payroll W-2 wages. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is that you are required to do this as an S Corp. You have to pay yourself. So if it's a like, maybe I want to, maybe I don't, I'm not quite sure, but maybe I'll just become an S Corp just to like be able to, it's a requirement that you do. So it's sort of like if you're going to make that commitment, then you do need to make the commitment to paying yourself a reasonable compensation, which is the words of the IRS.
Okay.
In terms of recommended payroll service, Gusto, of course. I mean, I feel I've set so many small business owners up on it. And I know I write for them, but actually before I even worked with them on any capacity, I was recommending them all the time. So it's not just because I work very closely with them now.
It's business focused.
Yeah, they really are just, I mean, I've had my clients be like, I can't believe I can run my own payroll for all my employees. It's amazing. Like people are so happy about how simple it is.
Okay. Sounds great. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. Okay. Payroll as an LLC is asking payroll and on, oh, okay. We already
we just talked about that.
Yeah. S Corp. We started off as a cash only business. Now, 9 years later, we have grown substantially, and I think we should change to an accrual method.
Sorry. I always spell it wrong.
How difficult is this, and do I need to wait until the end of the year? We use Quickbooks.
Okay. So first of all, I would definitely talk to an accountant or a tax advisor to make sure that switching to accrual is the right step for you, because part of changing to accrual is that you have to file a request to change your accounting method with the IRS. So you want to just be sure that this is the right move for you before you go through filing paperwork. Now, in terms of changing over in QuickBooks, it's actually really easy. It's just the setting. You just go to the gear, you go to account settings, you go to advanced, and then you can change your accounting method. So it's really not that challenging in QuickBooks because of the way QuickBooks is set up. The other thing that I would recommend you do though, is in QuickBooks, you can run your profit and loss reports on a cash basis or accrual basis. And it doesn't matter if you have selected in the settings cash or accrual. So you can actually do some compare and contrasting, right? You can run your year-to-date report to see like what it looks like on a cash basis, what it looks like on an accrual basis, and which has the most benefit for you based on the factors that you're weighing on this switch. So, and you could even do that when you consult with a tax advisor. But I definitely would say if you're still unsure, you're not like positive about this, then you do want to talk to somebody before you make that commitment. Then you need to request the change in your accounting method and use form 3115. Now, do you need to wait until the end of the year? No, because QuickBooks makes it very easy to run reports on both bases. So you don't actually it isn't like in QuickBooks, all of a sudden, if you switch over to accrual, all of your numbers won't work anymore, because the way the system works is basically the system has a method of converting cash basis accounting into accrual and vice versa. So within the system, that's all automated. So, the only thing that you would really have to change are your accounting practices to be more accrual based, which is like, okay, accrual is when something is incurred, is when it's not when the cash goes out for something, right? It's when you incur an expense. So if you hire me and I send you a contract on December 15th, or I send you an invoice on December 15th, right? I bill you for the services then, and you don't pay me until January. On cash basis, the expense counts in January. On accrual, it counts in December. So what that means is you have to change your bookkeeping style and the way that you do your bookkeeping to enter in your bills, right, when you receive them. So then that accurately shows up in the books.
So it's
but
almost
in
a
terms,
systematic change, really.
right. But in terms of, do you have to go back and like do a bunch of like updates to old data? The answer is no.
Okay, great. How can we reduce payroll costs and reduce time spent on accounting, payroll, and admin as an LLC?
Yeah, so this is a little tough for me to answer because payroll costs mean a lot of things. I'm not quite sure. I would say like one thing is, again, this cash flow webinar I keep referring to, there's a whole tab on like forecasting your staffing needs and your benefits percentages. So you could actually, in that, using that tool, begin to look at, okay, what if I reduced my benefit package? Like, how would that affect my cash flow and my bottom line? If I reduce salaries, or I increase salaries, or I held off on hiring somebody, right? Like, you could actually look at all of those factors and see how making like those shifts affect your overall business model.
Okay, so basically playing around with the numbers in a pre-coded, that what you guys provide, this kind of I assume it's like a coded sheet or template that you can put in numbers, and then it automatically sort of adds up and calculates things.
Yeah.
That way you can sort of play around and kind of like, I guess, strategize about how to best do.
You can see like how would this impact me? Because
Yeah,
you may think that doing something's going to make a huge impact. It doesn't make an impact. And you're like, well, it's not worth it, right? Mm-hmm. To reduce time, automation, like try to like use software that integrates with each other, and try to use software that can like bring some sort of automation into your business. So using apps that save time, so like time tracking apps. So instead of having your employees give you spreadsheets of their hourly time or something like that, which is very like labor intensive for you, like moving over to like an app-based system. And then trying to find apps that integrate with what you already use. So for example, like Gusto and Quickbooks integrates. So that then takes away part of the accounting burden on you. Oh, what if you had a time tracking app that also integrated with Gusto, right? So all of a sudden we're seeing these like integrations build off of each other, and that's going to take the burden off of you.
Okay. That sounds great. Thanks so much. Is it better to select, so the next question is it better to select the 24-week period than the 8-week period in terms of amount of loan forgiveness? So I guess we are kind of jumping back to the beginning, but.
Yeah, so again, we really want to think about your unique situation because it's so dependent on your business and what's going on. I can give you the general pros and cons of each, like, or I guess the general pros, like why someone may choose one over another, but you really have to think about your own
for
situation.
Yourself. Yeah.
So some pros of the 8-week one, I mean, you get faster forgiveness, right? Because you basically use it, you apply for your forgiveness, and you're done. Like your kind of PPP journey is not like spread out as long.
Dragging out, yes.
And it might be easier for you to meet staffing requirements because again, it's a shorter period of time, and you can kind of, it's almost like it's a little bit more controlled environment because it's such a short period of time. But with the 24-week, you have more time to spend the funds. And this is especially true if you are a business that can't reopen yet, right? So there's all these like, oh, don't reduce your payroll, blah, 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 blah. Well, it's like, if you can't reopen, right, you have more time around that because there are like, safe harbors around. You couldn't get up to your like operating levels. So
or they reopened and then they had to close again.
Right.
So
right.
So in the same situation. Yeah.
Yeah. So you're a little bit more in the like, I guess like cause and effect flow than this like controlled scenario. You have more time to plan what you're going to do with the funds, and you, just like we said, you have more time to respond to the unknown, right? And as Rita brought up, you may benefit from future legislation, right? Because we don't know what the legislation is going to be like in a few months around this stuff.
Yeah. And then we have like two sort of last two questions. Rebuilding strategies after COVID-19 shutdowns, how to handle pre-COVID debt during and after the pandemic.
Yeah, so during the pandemic, as much as possible, trying to get a deferral or reduction in payment, if that's at all possible with your lender. I mean, you may have already done this, but definitely checking in. And even if they've already given you a reduction, you know, we have cases surging all over the United States. It's possible that given what's going on in your city, county, state, you may be able to get another reduction because of like an increase in cases. So even if you've asked for a reduction and then or deferral and that's ended, it never hurts to ask again, and just kind of use like the current situation. After that, again, I'm referring back to the cash flow webinar because there's a whole section in that about managing your loan payments and how those impact your cash flow. And so when we look at, you know, our businesses holistically from a cash flow perspective, you know, our loan payments don't show up on our profit and loss report, but we need to make sure we have the money in the bank to pay for that. So you can play with those numbers, right? Maybe I'm deferring for, I don't know, let's say until next June. What will that look like in my numbers if I defer all these payments and then I have to double up, right?
Yeah.
If that's the way it works. Or if I'm taking a reduction, you know, you can actually see how that's going to affect your businesses holistically.
Yeah. So that makes great sense. And then the one question that is out of context, but just then I guess just give us some general, I guess, I don't know, some advice. Tax preparation for self-employed who took a PPP loan and they are an LLC.
So you want to keep all your loan documents, you know, you want to have all of that on hand. We've already talked about how to code it, right? So if you receive your forgiveness before the end of the year, how you're going to code it in your system, and that is going to show up on your profit and loss report, right? That is going to show up as non-income at the bottom. The thing is like, none of us really know, like, is there going to be like a new tax return next year? Is there going to be some part of a return that declares PPP money, right? Like, we don't know that yet because everything is, I mean, it's like, there's so much stuff. Even when the loan forgiveness application came out, I had to write that article and there was like no information on anything. So the truth of the matter is, I don't really know yet how you're going to report stuff, what you have to report, what we don't know. But what we do know is that you want to keep your documentation together. Even if you got your forgiveness, even if you think you're done, you want to keep everything, any correspondence, you want to keep everything together, and you want to make sure that if you receive your forgiveness before the end of the year, that forgiveness is coded properly in your bookkeeping so it shows up. So if you are, and honestly, we don't know yet how the tax situation is going to go next year, but you may want to start putting some money aside to work with a tax advisor if you're not already. So if you're somebody that's like DIYing your taxes and using TurboTax, next year is likely going to be the year that you might need to work with a professional because of all of these unknowns that were constantly.
The chaos of 2020. Yeah. I had a question, but I forgot to ask at the beginning. What do you advise to people who did not have a chance, because at the time they didn't know, to set aside or to open a separate bank account or checking account or savings account for a PPP or an IDLE? What can they do? How do you sort of recover that, or yeah, what would you advise for those people? Because I remember people asking that they didn't know, they got the PPP, they didn't open it, you know, before the money arrived. So what can those people do, or how should they handle that?
Yeah, so if you still have money to spend, like if you still have like half of your loan left or a lot of your loan left, I would still go and open it and just, you know, do some basic accounting. I hope you've been keeping track of stuff. If not, then it's a good time to go back through your records, keep track of what you need to keep track of in a spreadsheet, because you're going to need that information anyway. So you're just kind of doing yourself a favor and figure out what's left of that loan. So let's say you got a $100,000 loan and you spent 20 of it so far, then move the 80, that's the still cash in your bank, over to that special bank account. So you can still do it moving forward. The thing is that you just have to do the back record keeping, right? You just have to figure out where did the rest of that go on like a really simple, like I know there's $20,000. Where did I spend that $20,000? Putting that all line by line in like a spreadsheet and figuring that out.
And
that would be my recommendation.
Yeah, and then that's just like a PDF bank statement then, and then it's super easy to provide for the SB